Bueno, muy buenos días a todos los que se unen a esta sesión informativa de Colfuturo el día de hoy. Mi nombre es Lady Velázquez, hago parte del equipo de consejería académica de Colfuturo y hoy vamos a estar con uno de nuestros nuevos convenios que hemos firmado con la Universidad de Duke en Reino Unido, específicamente con la Escuela de Leyes o The School of Law, que en este caso el convenio les puede otorgar una beca de $20,000 para dos beneficiarios de Colfuturo. Recuerden que para acceder a este beneficio deben hacer su postulación por medio del programa Crédito Beca, cuya convocatoria va a cerrar pronto, específicamente el 29 de febrero. Así que mi consejo es que si después de esta presentación desean postularse a este maravilloso beneficio, vayan a la página de Colfuturo, sección Programa Crédito Beca, formulario, diligencia en el programa de su interés, en este caso de Duke University, de la Escuela de Leyes. Y en caso de ser seleccionados por Colfuturo, la universidad les podrá otorgar este gran beneficio. Así que para brindarnos la información no solo sobre el convenio, sino también sobre la universidad, los programas y demás información de utilidad, contamos con los representantes de la Universidad de Duke y adicionalmente contamos con un estudiante beneficiario de Colfuturo, quien actualmente se encuentra haciendo su programa. Así que thank you so much for being here and you can go ahead and start your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for having us. Welcome everyone who is on the call. My name is Oleg Kobolev. I'm the Associate Dean for International Studies at Duke Law School. And joining me today are my colleague, Leslie Allen, along with one of our students from Colombia, Andres. And today's program is really meant to give you all a better sense of both the application process to elite LLM programs in the United States, and also is meant to give you some thoughts and ideas on how to actually pick a program if you have choices, because it's not just about putting the best application forward, it's also picking the program out of the choices that you may have. So I'm going to start by sharing my PowerPoint, and hopefully this will work. If you don't see it in just a minute, let me know. Can anybody see the screen? Okay, perfect. Thank you, Leslie. Okay, and so we will get started. All right, so the first thing to talk about is sort of what kind of degrees you can get in the United States. The vast majority of law degrees granted in the United States are JD degrees, which are 3-year graduate degree in law. That's the standard American law degree. To get that degree, you need to go to university for 4 years and concentrate in any particular subject, doesn't actually matter. And then you spend 3 years in an American law school, graduate with an American JD degree. The other degrees that many top American law schools offer are the LLM, which is what we're going to talk about the most today. That's a 1-year degree. It requires you to have another law degree, a primary law degree from another country like Colombia. And it's really meant to be kind of a crash course into US law or sort of a way to build competency and expertise in a particular subset of practice areas, whether it's US law or international comparative law or anything else. It just kind of depends a little bit on the program. And we're going to talk about how different LLM degrees could be quite different depending on where you're looking and kind of what programs you are considering. There is also an academic degree offered by many top American law schools called the SJD. Sometimes it's called JSD, but it's basically a PhD degree in law. It's primarily meant for folks who wish to enter academia, especially academia in their home country. It is a degree that is that requires you to either have an LLM or a JD. In some rare circumstances, if you have a law degree from a common law country like New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, or United Kingdom, you may go straight into the SJD program. But most people who pursue the SJD have an LLM first. All right, so next we're going to talk about applying to the LLM, right? So there are several things to keep in mind when it comes to the LLM application. The first one is that the vast majority of students who seek admission to top LLM programs in the US have to get familiar with something called the LSAC, Law School Admissions Council. I'm sure Andres remembers it well. It's essentially an electronic clearinghouse that allows you to apply to multiple programs with the same set of basic documents, which are your transcripts from your home university and your letters of recommendation. There are other aspects of your application that we're going to talk about that you have to submit. Those will vary from school to school, but every school will require you to submit your transcripts. Every school will require you to submit your letters of recommendation. So LSEC allows you to use those documents and send them to every school. It also allows you to submit everything electronically. So there are advantages to using it. There are some disadvantages to it, and that's primarily cost. It costs money to create an account. You have to pay for various parts of this process in the LSEC system itself. And that is in addition to what you're paying to apply to each individual school. So most American law schools will charge you a fee between $70 and $85 for the privilege of submitting your documents and having them reviewed by that program. So costs can add up very quickly, especially if you're applying to 5 to 10 schools. You might be looking at almost $1,000 that you'd be paying just in application fees, something to keep in mind. There are several schools, and Duke is one of them, that allow something called direct applications. That's when you bypass the LSAC system entirely and apply directly by putting your required documents in an envelope and mailing it physically to the university. If that's Georgetown and Duke are the two that I know that still accept them. Most other schools don't. But if you're really interested in these two schools and you don't want to pay the money, that's one way to do it. That doesn't disadvantage you really in any way in the process, but it's just, I would only do it if you are not applying to multiple schools. A quick note about the application timeline. If you're thinking about the LLM, when should you start? When should you start thinking about it? How long ahead do you need to plan? So my recommendation is to really start seriously looking and doing the research about a year and a half before you will start in the program. Now, remember, in American law schools, the typical start of an academic semester is August. So if you're thinking about starting the program, say, August of 2025, in a couple of months, you should really start thinking about this. If you're hoping to start in August of 2024, then you're in trouble because at this point, most programs have closed their applications. And so you would not actually, you don't have enough time to actually have a realistic opportunity to get into the program. So for those of you on the call who are not applying yet, the first window that will realistically open would be August of 2025, okay? So what do you do? How do you apply? Well, you start with the research. Obviously, look at the deadlines. Again, most schools open their applications in September of October of the year preceding the start of the program, and they close them between the end of December and the end of January. So by February 1st, most application windows have closed for the intended date of August of that year. So something to keep in mind. Within a year of application, so we're now a year out, right? So it would be August, say, of August of 2024, if you're looking at August 2025, you really need to start getting everything ready. Start preparing for TOEFL if you plan to take a language test. Start asking your recommenders for letters of recommendation. Start thinking about how and what you're going to write in your personal statement. and obviously start thinking about funding. And we can talk about that a little bit more. That's part of why we're here. The Call Futura, of course, is an amazing opportunity for folks from Colombia to be able to finance a significant portion of their legal studies in the US. But the bottom line is you really want to start getting ready pretty early on. Okay, so before I go to the next slide, I wanted to ask Andres if he had any thoughts or tips or advice for students who are sort of thinking about the LLM in the future.
Yes, absolutely. What I would suggest to all the Colombian students are to really check the programs, check what suits you better, check which country, which city. Everything is costly outside of Colombia, so you really have to be aware of that. Check the line of work you're willing to do afterwards, the goals you're looking for after, and definitely get to know the people who are currently in the LM programs and maybe the professors or the faculty. I think it's a great opportunity to get a grasp of the environment, of the people, the classes, and just do a thorough research about everything. I think it's super useful to really know the program. That's all. I think that's my suggestion.
Perfect. Thank you, Andres. Absolutely. Super, super important. And we're going to talk about more about how to do that and what to look for as you do that research. All right, so I'm going to next turn to the different components of your application. So remember, I just said every school will require you to submit your transcripts, your university records, and also letters of recommendation. But there are other elements that you're going to have to submit. And one of the most important element is your personal statement. Different schools ask for different things. So you need to be careful to make sure that your personal statement that you're submitting to a particular school is responsive to what that school is asking. Some schools like Duke have a very general prompt that says, tell us about yourself and why you're interested in the program. Other schools could be very specific, or they might have short answers to kind of multiple different prompts. It really depends on the program, and I encourage you to kind of carefully think about it. Whatever the program, though, and whatever the personal statement, the form of personal statement, the most important component of personal statement, in my view, is that it is authentic, that it does not feel like essentially a recitation of your CV or repeating of your accomplishments. The reason why it's really important to make it very personal, it's not Chat GPT writing your personal statement, is because it's often the last document the admissions officer will read, not the first, which means that by the time they get to your personal statement, they've already read your transcripts, they've already looked at your resume, they've already looked at your letters of recommendation. So if your personal statement basically has nothing new to say, it adds nothing to your file. And in fact, it might subtract something from your file, which is that it is just feels too bland, too generic, not very memorable. So my suggestion is to try to make it personal, make it about yourself, pick a story, pick a theme that is meaningful to you, and talk about it. It could be very personal. It does not have to be. It could be about, the job that you had, or something, or your father, or something that happened to you at university that led you to pursue an LLM. But it doesn't have to be that even. It could be much more about you as a person. Again, at least at Duke, what I look for and what my colleagues look for is authenticity, that I can tell something about the person from reading the statement, not just a kind of a collection of accomplishments. So something to keep in mind. Andres, would you mind sharing a few words about how you went about writing your personal statement?
Yeah, for my personal statement, I took a lot of time. It took a lot of time. As Dean Koblet was saying, you really have to pick a story, try to make yourself stand out, but not with accomplishments or like all the projects or all the works or all the jobs you have done during the years. I think it's best to show your personality to show what you really are about. I think, from my perspective, now that I'm on this side of the table, I
Exactly.
think it's better to show how you are. I think at the end of the day, all of us are great lawyers. All of us will be successful. But I think for the case of Duke, I would say what I found in my colleagues here, it's their personalities, how good they are, how friendly, how competitive in a good way they are. So I think if you can show values in their personal statement, should be positive for you. I think you also have to highlight why the school. I think that was an important thing that I really work on. Like, why are you choosing that school? I think that's very important because you like a professor, because he has a program that you really like, because I don't know, they have some journals that you're really interested in writing about, and definitely be concise. I think it shouldn't be super long. I think there are some instructions that you should follow, and I think that's very important. Here in the university, everything is about following instructions and how everything should be done. So that's the first part. You should be showing that you're able to do in that simple personal statement. And finally, I don't know, maybe, yeah, like ask someone to proofread it after we have written it. I think it's super important that someone who knows you, maybe a friend or maybe your boss or a professor, that you have like that relationship of trust, maybe your mentor can give you some insights, advices on how to improve, on if your English is not as good as you think it is, and you can reach out to us as alumni. I think that's also useful, but definitely proofread it and make sure you don't have any mistakes, and definitely write it yourself. Do not use any of the AI tools. I think that's super important. But I think I think that's how I approached it, and that's what I will suggest to other students.
Excellent. Thank you, Andres. Absolutely. Agree with everything you said. And I think the point you made also about personalizing the statement to the school is super important, something that you really ought to think about. If the statement has nothing to do, like has nothing about the university that you're applying to, that's going to hurt you in the admission process because it sends a clear signal to the admissions officer that this is not a school that you're particularly interested in because you haven't had to take in the time to actually write something about that school. So, you don't have to rewrite a personal statement for each university, but it's definitely something you need to be cognizant of. So before I go to the next slide, I have a couple of questions I see that I'll address quickly. So one is about the English requirement from Karen. Good question. So most schools have a requirement that you speak English at a pretty high level. Typically, different schools have different numbers, numerical tests that they look at. Most will look at TOEFL and IELTS. Those are the two biggest ones, standardized tests. And, 100 of TOEFL and above is usually what you need to be competitive in most programs. There are some exceptions. Sometimes you can dip below that for various reasons that you probably would want to explain. But it's definitely, English proficiency is extremely important. At a school like Duke, you'll be taking classes with JDs. You'll be graded in the same way. So you're essentially expected to operate at a level of a native English speaker in most of the in most ways. So then there are two questions from Juliana. One about the scholarships and the costs. I'll address that later on in the program. And also about the interviews, which is another quick question. Do you have to do an interview? Depends on the program. At Duke, yes. We will interview all of our finalists. I'm sure Andres remembers being interviewed probably by Professor Idzelis. We don't interview everyone, but people that we think are admissible, we will try to interview to get a better understanding of who they are as an individual, why they're interested in Duke, what they want to do afterwards. There's some schools that ask you to do these sort of automated videos that you record answering kind of generic questions. That's not my style. We're much more about people, but you may be required to do that in some of the other schools. And from Camilla, who's asking for advice on how to write a personal statement, Andres has agreed, I think, graciously to stick around after we finish the webinar, and perhaps he can share his contact information so you can reach out to him, because that's a topic for an entire webinar, probably how to write a personal statement. But I'm glad that you're thinking carefully about it. All right, so we have a lot to cover though, so I'm going to move forward. The second very important piece of your application is your resume. We call it resume here in the US. Often you call it CV in South America. But basically, this is a pretty easy thing. You just have to have, essentially a record of your academic and career accomplishments. There's several things that American law schools and American legal employers expect from you. One is that it's be pretty short. Two, that it's in reverse chronological order, meaning that you start with the most recent thing and then go backwards. You can look at some examples. A lot of schools have examples of legal resumes online. Try to, you don't have to make it US style necessarily, but a good CV is very helpful because it's a map of your career. And it's one of the first things that an application admissions officer is going to look at to get a better sense, to kind of acquaint themselves with sort of where are you in your professional life? What have you done so far before they kind of go and start looking more closely at all parts of your application. This is like a roadmap, right, that you give them. So spend time thinking about it and talking about it and make sure that it's clear, consistent, and free of errors. That's true for, kind of back to what Andres said, proofread everything, because any kind of mistake, we will forgive a mistake or two. But if your resume or your cover letter is full of errors, that tells me that you're not a careful writer. That tells me that you're a sloppy thinker. That's not going to help you in the application process. No top law school will want to admit someone who can't, be bothered to carefully proofread their application, right? It's just kind of obvious. So be mindful of that as well. Okay, so letters of recommendation. I mentioned them earlier. Every school is going to require you to have some. Some schools will require 2 or 3. Some schools will require more. Again, you need to read the application instructions for each school to figure that out. I have sort of several pieces of advice on this that I think you should, be mindful of. One is that it's really important to ask people to be your recommenders who know you, not just people with the most impressive title. I remember you are the person being admitted, not the partner at your firm, not the most impressive professor at your school, not the prime minister of Colombia. It's you. So it's less important how impressive the person is writing the recommendation, much more important what they say. The second thing is that you really want to help that person help you. So give them your CV, give them a draft of your personal statement, talk to them about the schools that you're applying to, prepare them, and ask them to be as specific as possible, and try to give specific examples of some of the qualities that they think you bring to an elite American law school. Whether it's because you're really great at working on teams, or you take a lot of initiative, or maybe you did extremely well in their class, and you're an excellent writer or an innovative thinker. Don't just have them say it. Give examples, because anybody can say anything, right? But it actually has very little value without a concrete example behind it, right? Because otherwise, all these letters of recommendations, they just don't add much to your application when your professor says, I've met Andres, had a good grade in my class. Well, I already know that. I've read his transcript. He's smart, dedicated, and would make a great student. That tells me nothing. That letter of recommendation has no value, okay? But if the same professor says, here are some examples of how Andres went above and beyond. I hired him as a research assistant in my class. I only hired top 5 people. Or in the 20 years that I've worked with students, Andres was in the top 10%. That's valuable. So the more concrete you can be as a recommender, the more effective you will be in convincing the school that this person is worth admitting. Another question that often I get is sort of who should be writing them in terms of, does it have to be 2 professors or 3 professors or a professor and a work supervisor? At Duke, it doesn't actually matter. We don't require you to have letters from different types of people, but we prefer, and some schools actually require, that at least one letter be from an academic, from somebody who's familiar with your academic performance. And then some schools prefer that at least one letter be from someone who's familiar with your work. So maybe it was an associate that you work with, so supervised you, or someone else who's familiar with your legal work and ability. Again, we are not that prescriptive. I'm just looking for folks who have something useful and concrete to add to the application. But I do think it is valuable to have those 2 types of recommenders because they speak to different aspects of your personality and different aspects of your candidacy. You could be a really great student, for example, but not have any common sense and not know how to work in a legal setting, right? That's a problem. The other way works too. Maybe you were not the best student in the school, but when you were at your firm, you really were outstanding because you really understood what the clients were looking for. You were willing to work hard. You understood what the partners were looking for. And so that's something that could really help your application. Andres, do you have anything to add on the letters of recommendation?
No, I think I I did follow your advice
Good.
by the letter. In my experience, I worked for law firms, and I didn't ask my partners in the law firm. I asked for my senior associates to write my recommendation letters
Smart.
because I used to work with them under their supervision, direct supervision. So they really knew my work. And in the same sense, I asked for a professor, for which whom I did research during law school. So he knew I had taken a class and I had worked with him. So he had like both perspectives of me as a student and as a worker, if we may say. But I've heard of other friends who have asked their partners, maybe they have the direct supervision. I think it's better if the person really knows you because they will have something to talk about you. If it's just an important person, it will be like a super blunt without a purpose letter, which will show nothing about you. So it doesn't help you at all. But yeah, I think what you said, it's perfectly clear. And a recommendation for all the students would be to get the letters with time, because it takes a lot of time to submit the letters through LSAC. So just to have that in mind, because they have to do it by themselves. So you have to teach them how to upload them. And sometimes that takes time. That would be my only practical advice.
Yeah, no, great advice. Excellent. And I see we got a few more questions. I love all the questions. This is good. So I'll try to address them before going to the next slide. So in terms of can the recommendation be in Spanish? It can just then have a translator, like you just have it translated by someone who with like an authenticity stamp that this is like a real person translating the letter. But it does not have to be written originally in English. For academic and professional, we just addressed. Karen, I prefer both. And specific number of years of experience as a lawyer. Christian is asking, do you have to have that to be considered? So it depends on the school, but generally the answer is no. There is one LLM program I know of, which is Columbia Law School, that I believe requires you to have a minimum of 2 years of legal experience, but you have to check. They may have changed that as well. But most programs do not require you to have a certain number of years. I think most programs, certainly at Duke, we want variety of sort of backgrounds. And so we will have people with 5 to 7 years of experience, and with 10 years of experience, and with 0 years of experience. So it's much more individualized. If you don't have a lot of experience, obviously, then your academic performance is going to matter much more than if you have 7 years of top-notch legal experience, but maybe you weren't the best student in your class. So it's kind of like a scale, right? So different things are weighted differently depending on what kind of period of life you're in, professional career you're in at the time of your application. So Carolina is also asking about cost of living. I'll address that a little bit at the end, and Andres, you can talk about this. But the short answer, it varies a lot from place to place. Obviously, it's very expensive to live in New York City or Chicago. Durham is kind of average. I suppose you can find a place that is really cheap to live in, but it's probably going to be a little hot in a forest. So, you have to kind of pick, in terms of the programs themselves, among the top programs, Duke is probably on the lower end of the cost of living, but I think generally it'd be more expensive than Columbia overall, right? Because it is a different country and things are just more expensive here. Okay, moving on to the next question, to the next part, and this is something that I know everybody wants to know about, which is scholarships and financial aid. So a couple of things to talk about here. Legal education in the US is very expensive. It costs $74,100 to attend Duke Law School for a year, okay? And that is a pretty average price at a top school in the US. This does not include cost of living. That's which could range from $20,000 to $25,000 a year on the lower end to in a big city could be more, 30, 35. So you have to budget, and I recognize that for many people this amount is sort of insurmountable, especially if you're coming from a developing country. So the truth is there is help, and help comes in different forms, including, of course, through our wonderful partners on the call today called Futuro. But in addition to external funding like Futuro, there's also other organizations like Fulbright, Rotary Club, many others that you can seek additional support from. And I encourage you to do that. We actually have on our website a link to various external scholarship programs by country, and maybe Leslie can put it in the chat at some point. So you can see sort of what's under Columbia. But schools themselves also try to lower the cost of tuition by providing scholarships to students. There are two important things to know about scholarships. One, in some schools, you're automatically considered for a scholarship just when you apply. In other schools, and that includes Duke, you have to request a scholarship. Otherwise, the school is unlikely to consider you for one. It's sort of a trigger for them to consider you for scholarships. The other important component of this is that schools, by and large, do not look at the money at the same time as they look at admission. They will usually try to admit the best people and then try to use their scholarship budgets to bring those people to Duke to the extent that they can, right? So it is not going to hurt you to ask for a scholarship, and that's something I want you to remember. Keep in mind that schools that ask you for a scholarship letter, the letter itself should be pretty practical, because you don't have to don't just repeat the stuff you said in the personal statement, because they've already read it. And remember, by the time they're reading your scholarship letter, they've already decided to admit you. So they already think you're great. Otherwise, they wouldn't admit you. So the scholarship letter should be much more pragmatic, maybe talking about your financial situation, talking about your goals. What are you trying to do with this degree? Talking about sort of what you've done so far to make this education possible. Like maybe you applied to Colfutura, or maybe you've applied to this other scholarship, or maybe you saved some money, or maybe your family is helping you. All of those factors are important as you try to build a case for financial aid. You can ask. Many people actually will say, listen, here's my financial situation. I have this loan, I have this grant, but I'm missing, $30,000 or $20,000 piece. So this is what I need to make this education possible. Nothing wrong with that, but you don't have to do it. You could be more vague if you don't want to disclose how much you actually need. It's a little bit of a negotiation, but typically the more forthright you are, the likely you are to get sort of an award that is generous. One other thing to mention, American law schools, believe it or not, actually lose money most years. It costs about $100,000 to educate each student at Duke Law School. So even though the tuition seems extremely high, and it is, it actually does not cover the operating budget of a place like Duke. And the reason for it is because of the resources that you have available at your disposal here. It's just expensive to run this place. So, there is that kind of financial reality in among American law schools. And, it's something that you should be kind of clear-eyed about and thoughtful about as you approach the LLM. This is not a place where you're just going to get everything for free and then go on with your life. Remember, there's a huge economic benefit that you derive out of having a top-tier degree, law degree in the United States, including being able to sit for a U.S. bar exam, although that's not the premier benefit. That's not the primary reason to do it. So, there is a financial incentive and a return on investment when it comes to at least Duke's LLM program. I have yet to speak with a graduate who said, Oleg, this was a huge mistake. I wish I went to, study history or I don't know, underwater biology. I have not yet heard that. Most people that I speak with say that this has been a really life-changing experience and investment for them. Okay. So one last piece I want to kind of share with you about making sure that your application is really, really good is to make sure that not just the documents that you submit, but every interaction you have with the school is fully professional because they're all tracked, okay? The schools are keeping track of what you're asking, how you're interacting, what are your questions, what is your social media presence like? All of these things are really important because they reflect on your character and on your professionalism. So, sometimes we get people writing emails to us saying things like, I have done nothing, no research into Duke Law School, but I'm interested in your program. Here's a list of 25 questions. Can you answer it for me? That person is hurting their application with that email because they have immediately demonstrated to us that they have not taken the time to look at our website, to do any research. Instead, they expect us to basically spoon feed that to them for some reason. We get over 1,000 applications a year for 85 spots. We have plenty of people who want to come here. We're not going to do that, right? And so that's something for you all to keep in mind, not just for Duke, but for any top law school. The law school interviews, I think somebody asked about this earlier. Same thing. It's a really good opportunity for you to have questions, to be prepared. I'll share with you an experience that I just had doing an admissions interview yesterday, where I was speaking with a person, and it was probably the worst interview I've ever had. And I've been doing this for many years. And it wasn't because the person didn't speak good English or was not pleasant. It was because the person did not say anything meaningful, informative, or useful about the school itself. I kept asking questions, and all I was getting were these really generic answers that told me that this person has done no thinking. Maybe this person has done some research, but was unable to articulate to me anything concrete or specific about why they want to do the LLM, why they're interested in Duke Law School, why in the United States, why this time in the, in their career. It was all very broad, right? Very generic. And that's really bad. So take that very seriously and make sure that, you're authentic and that you answer questions like you have real answers. It's not just like kind of vague, nothing specific. And take the interview opportunity to interview the school itself. And that's another thing I was going to say. I love getting good questions. And though they could be very, there's no wrong or right question to ask. As long as you've done your research, you're going to have good informed questions. It demonstrates interest. It demonstrates that the person is engaged, is proactive, is thinking carefully about it. So treat interviews as an opportunity and don't get too nervous. It usually is good news. Visiting schools. Colombia is far away, but not too far away. It's not Sri Lanka. I just spoke with somebody from Sri Lanka. It's really hard for them to get here. From Bogota, not so bad. I've been on those flights. So if you are thinking about going to an American law school and you already have plans to come to the US on a holiday, or maybe you have been admitted to a couple of schools and you have the financial opportunity and the time, come and visit. That's a really great way to kind of just feel what it's like to be in the school. At Duke, we love visitors. As Leslie knows, we have them almost every week at this point. And we arrange for them to sit in on a class, to meet with our students, to kind of have day in the life as a student. And I think that is super important because it will give you a much more sort of individualized, thoughtful way of deciding between the different programs. And we're going to turn to that in a minute. All right. So I see that a couple of questions I'm going to try to answer. And then we're going to switch from sort of your application to how to make a decision, because that's also very important. And some of your questions here that I see will be answered there. But somebody asks, my GPA is not competitive. Is it a negative for scholarships? Maybe. Again, depends a little bit on where you are in your professional career. So if your GPA is not fantastic, but you have amazing work experience of several years, that might, balance things out. But yeah, I mean, not doing well in school is not going to help you. Like I can't pretend otherwise. But, you can also try to explain it. I've had, for example, one student we admitted who had a really bad year in their program, but otherwise did very well. And that student was really smart and wrote a separate letter essentially saying that this was the year when, this person's mother died. And so they had really hard time. We're all people here, okay? We understand that sometimes your academic performance can, fluctuate. We don't admit robots into the program. So if there is a reason why your GPA was not quite where you want it to be, you can explain it, and that might help kind of fix that issue in the eyes of the scholarship committee or the admissions. Are the interviews virtual? Yes, they're all on Zoom. Mention bar exam. We'll talk about the bar exam. All right. So next. So you've followed my advice, let's pretend for a minute, and you got into 5 top law schools. Congratulations. This is wonderful. I have one piece of bad news for you. You have to pick one. You can't go to 5, right? So how do you decide? What do you do to make a good decision? And this is super, super important because LLM programs are very different from each other. And this is one point that I really want to emphasize. A lot of students, unfortunately, make the mistake of latching on to one thing and making a decision based on sort of a factor that may even have nothing to do with their program, their degree. I'll give you some examples. Some people will say, I'm going to go to school because it's in a big city, because I think it's easier to get a job there. Not true. It's a factor. If you want to be in a big city, certainly you should look at it. It's a location is a factor. But you shouldn't pick a program because of the city. You should pick a program because of the program. Another person might say, I want to be in a program, I want to go to this program because I've read in this ranking that it was number 5 versus number 6. Well, that's a terrible way to make a decision. First of all, rankings are JD programs, not LLM. Second of all, the numerical differences are minute. They're almost inconsequential. Between number 1 and number 10, there's some differences, but between number 4 and number 8, or number 4 and number 6, it's almost imperceptible. So, ranking is relevant, but it should not be the deciding factor. My advice to you is to be more balanced and to look at the factors you see on the screen and then weigh them based on your personal preferences, goals, desires, family situation, whatever else. So I'm going to talk about each factor in some detail. Reputation, academic experience, social life, career, bar exam, and obviously finances. So I'll start with reputation because it is a very important factor for many people. So I already mentioned that I don't think rankings are the only thing that you need to look at, although that's something that is important. I would encourage you to actually talk to people in your community and get a sense of what the reputation of a particular school is like in your country. And I also encourage you to think about sort of what you're trying to get out of the degree. But the truth is that when you're talking about the top 10, top 15 programs in the US, their reputations are very, very similar, at least in the eyes of American employers and American lawyers, whether you go to Chicago, Duke, Michigan, Cornell, or Northwestern, is far less important than all the other factors, such as how well did you do in the program? What did you do in the program? What classes did you take? What your experience was like? Did you build meaningful social connections and professional relationships? How did you, what were the sort of the overall arc of your experience? Those are going to be much more important in the eyes of the employer than the brand of the school. Okay. So the next thing is academic experience. And this is the topic that I think deserves its own slide. The truth is academic experience will vary dramatically from program to program. Some LLM programs are structured to separate LLMs and JDs, where JDs essentially take classes independently of LLMs or very rarely see LLMs, or maybe they're graded in a different way, where LLMs take a lot of LLM-only classes. And other programs like Duke prioritize integration, where everybody's kind of the same, is together in the same program. Obviously, I work at Duke, and I believe that the integrated method is better. I think it's true that it's harder to do that, given the size of some of the LLM programs. Generally, the bigger the LLM program, the less integrated the JD and LLMs are. And the smaller the program, the more integrated they are. So something to keep in mind if that's important to you. I think it is important because you learn more by building relationships, not just with your classmates in the LLM program, but in the JD. It gives you more choices to be in an integrated program, and you also get to know your professors better. It also helps because your academic performance can be benchmarked against everybody else in the program. And when it comes to American firms, like what I said before, they're intensely focused on your academics, not just on sort of the brand name of the school that you're at. So having a program that gives you the opportunity to really excel among everyone in the class gives you a bit of an advantage. Course availability also varies a lot from program to program. At Duke, for example, we try to we prioritize LLMs over first and second year JD students in terms of selecting courses. We also reserve spaces in courses for LLMs because our goal is to get LLMs in almost every course in the law school. Now, we can never guarantee anyone that they'll get into the exact course they want because it's a function of availability, how many spaces they are versus how many people are interested in them. But it is an important factor. And in a smaller school like Duke, you will have potentially fewer courses offered. But again, we offer 150 courses a semester. You can take 6. So I don't know if it makes a huge difference whether you have 150 or 300 courses. What does matter, though, is how likely are you to actually get into the courses? Unfortunately, some programs will allow JDs to register first. All JDs register first, and then whatever spaces are left are given to the LLMs. So you may have 150 courses in the catalog, but realistically, you're only picking out of 15 courses, right, that have spaces in them. So that's something to also be mindful of. How much or how little to specialize, if you care about this, internship opportunities are very important for some people, but not for others. We can talk about that as well. Some people really like the opportunity, at least at Duke, to take classes not just at the law school, but at the business school or other parts of the university. So you're building expertise across fields. It's law and business, law and social policy, law and history, law and political science, law and economics. For others, it doesn't matter. But if it is a factor, you should think about it. Certainly, pro bono and extracurriculars are important. Andres is just telling me that he's going on a trip over spring break to this town in Western North Carolina to do some pro bono work, which he needs for the New York bar. But it also sounds like a lot of fun to kind of do that trip with a bunch of his friends and the head of our pro bono program. You want to find out, is this something that you can do in your school or not? Because some schools restrict that to JDs and others don't. Andres, anything you want to add or subtract perhaps from this slide?
No, I think just to add to your intervention, I would say in almost all the schools, you can see the courses that are available. It's very important that you check beforehand in every of the LLM programs, all the courses that you can participate, because that will depend on choosing the program. Duke has an excellent courses. That's why I chose Duke. But I'm sure that all the other programs have as good as classes, and it depends exactly on what you want. So besides that, everything should be, students should try to do the research and try to find out what they really want and what they are expecting to have of the program, and that should be the driver on deciding upon which program to enroll.
Yeah, that's super helpful. All right, so academic experience, obviously foundational, but I think the social experience is equally important. And Andres, I want to turn this over to you. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what your social experience here has been like, and kind of talk about the location of the place, and to the extent you can, and you feel comfortable, maybe compare and contrast this to, locations of programs in big cities, and how you see the difference or the similarities between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. Durham is a small town. It's a college town in the US. If you've visited the US, you should understand this concept. It's a town, and everything is surrounded about. Everything's about the university. So you get the vibes of bars, university bars, of the sports events, of all the social and activities that are around the university. So you don't depend mostly of the city, but of the university. That changes completely if you're in a big city like LA, New York, maybe Chicago, because then the university is just a building, maybe in the city, and it gets lost, and you're just enjoying the city and all the restaurants and all the different people who live in the city. Here at Duke, I would say my experience has been amazing. You really get to know the people in your program because we all live close to each other. So you really get to build relationships. I think, at least in my perspective as a Latin American, that's a super important factor. And that's what I've enjoyed the most of this program, to get to know the people, to not only network, because that's important, but also to build relationships for life. Um, you also get to do some sports in a campus college. I don't know if you can, I think you should in other cities, but if you like sports, if you like hiking, that will depend on your personality. That's as well. You should really investigate on what you want and be sincere. And if you like to do these types of activities, if you like these types of social events, you should that should be also a driver. Um, eh, at least in the US, well, if you're in this coast, you can travel to New York easily. The chips are the flights are cheap. To DC, you can take a train or drive. Also to Miami or to Atlanta if you're willing to go. I have done several trips during my LM year by car, by plane. It's super easy. It just depends on exactly what you want. And I would say definitely eh, for me, it's been a wonderful experience to live in a campus, in a city campus. You really get to know the people in your program. So that was one of my goals, and it has that I've been accomplishing that throughout the year. So that's all I can say. Maybe you should also check with other people who live in big cities to have their own experience. I think they are also having a wonderful time. I don't have doubts about that.
All right, thank you. That was great. The only other thing I would add to all of this is that the size of the program, I think, has a significant impact on your experience. Andres mentioned how, he built really strong relationships here. I think in many ways, this is a function of the size of the program. The bigger the program, the harder I think it is to do, but still possible. But it's just maybe you don't build relationships with quite as many people, or you don't get to know everyone quite as well. But it is, at Duke, at least, we prioritize diversity of the program as well. So our class is relatively small, about 85 students, but they are from 35 countries. So you will have people from all over the world: South America, Europe, North America, Africa, Middle East, Asia, Southeast Asia, Oceania are all represented. And that happens intentionally because we think it's gives you the opportunity to kind of meet and get to know and become friends with people from truly everywhere in the world, and including Americans, of course. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about the career services. I know that's an important factor for many people. And I'll start with sort of two things. First, it shouldn't be a surprise. Well, maybe it is a surprise, but I don't want this to be a surprise. But it is quite difficult for folks to get a job, a permanent job in the United States after graduation. It is possible, and our graduates do it all the time, but it is not easy. And so it's really important that if this is an interest of yours, or if you want to work in the US for a period of time, that you are very comfortable with the expertise and the sort of the strength of the career services that the LLM program offers. And keep in mind that a lot of schools have very different levels of services for LLMs and JDs. So you shouldn't just rely on what the JD career services are and assume that LLMs get the same stuff. They may or may not. The best thing to know, to find out, is to ask. This is what our Career Center does. And it is, we're very proud of the fact that it's fully integrated. Our LLM and JD career services are intertwined. So LLMs are not segregated or do not have some sort of separation in terms of services. I think the most important part of the Career Center is really that personal relationship and connections that you build with your career counselor. It's so much of the advice that you will get to be successful post LLM, especially in the US, is individualized, is personalized. And so we at Duke, and I think every good career center, will do a lot of these things that you see in these boxes. I think this is kind of, in my view, essential. If the career center does not offer all of those services and more, that should be a red flag, frankly, for you when looking at a program. And I'm happy to talk about it in more detail, but the bottom line is each person who is doing a job search post the LLM is an individual with their own unique sets of goals and needs and backgrounds. And so they deserve having that personalized advice, but what we don't have here at Duke, or really any other program, are jobs, right? And so sometimes students have sort of unrealistic expectations about that. And I just want to be honest that that's not, we can't promise anybody a job post-graduation. That's just not possible. Okay. I also want to talk a little bit about, and this kind of ties in with careers. It's, you want to think about the LLM, not just in the short term, as in like, what kind of job am I going to get afterwards? You're going to get a great job. That's for sure. But also, what does it do for me for the rest of my professional career? And I think that is a bigger question that I think you should answer. And you will find that at least our graduates tell us years and decades after that the lessons that they learned here, the networks that they build, help them in their professional lives for the entirety of their professional career. But you have to be intentional about it. It doesn't just happen, by magic. You have to seek that out. And so these are some of the qualities that I think LLM program, frankly, most LLM programs should be able to give you, provided that you seek advantage of it. Interdisciplinary knowledge, being able to take classes at other schools, or understanding how there are different ways to analyze legal issues using methods from different disciplines, from law, from economics, from political science, from social sciences. That's a skill. Cross-cultural competency, building meaningful friendships and relationships from people from all over the world, not just from your country, not just from South America, not just from people who speak Spanish, but from people who speak Japanese and French and, Arabic, because you will be interacting. If you work at a top, firm, or at any top legal employer, your practice is going to be international by default. And having familiarity, comfort, and cultural understanding of what folks from other cultures, how they operate, what they do, is super helpful. Taking leadership roles, participating in student organizations, inviting speakers, doing things on campus as a student leader will help you gain confidence and will help you in your future jobs, where being a leader is an important component of your professional career, right? At some point, you are going to be expected to lead, not just to follow. And comfort with uncertainty. This is something that American legal education does very well. In a lot of classes, you don't actually get any answers. The professor isn't going to stand there and say, this is the way to do it in this particular order. This is the answer. This professor is going to stand there and say, how do you think about this? What are the possible solutions? How would you handle uncertainty, because this is an ambiguous or gray area? That is something that you're going to be dealing with for the rest of your life. Legal problems, if there is an easy solution, Google can do it, right? A machine can answer the question. The reason we have lawyers is because they're hard problems that, don't have easy answers. And so one of the things that you're going to train yourself in a top tier LLM program, or at least at Duke, is to be very comfortable with that uncertainty and not let that derail you, but in fact, embrace it and come up with creative answers and solutions to sort of uncertain problems. Okay, I promise I'm almost done. The bar exam. Several of you asked, what about the bar? So LLM programs allow you to take the bar exam in a number of different jurisdictions in the United States. And there are several, you see a map here in the United States, and so I'm going to explain what this is. The states that are colored in orange have adopted something called uniform bar exam, which is basically the same set of basic questions. And so if you take it in one state, you can use that score in every other state. But this gets LLM students sometimes confused, thinking that if a state has adopted UBE, it automatically will allow you to practice law there and take the bar exam there as as an LLM. That's not true. Each state in the United States licenses lawyers on its own terms. Okay, so somebody asked, what is the bar exam? That is a licensure test that allows you to represent yourself to be a US lawyer and provide legal advice. So each state licenses lawyers separately, and states have different rules governing who can and cannot practice law and what education you need. So the states that have stars next to them are states that tend to be the most LLM friendly and the most popular among our students. And that would be the state of New York, state of Illinois, state of Texas, and state of California. There are many other states that will allow you to take the bar as an LLM, but you have to look into specific requirements because certain states will require you to take certain classes in the LLM to become eligible, and that includes New York most commonly. So at least at Duke, we actually do a lot of advising to students about navigating sort of the bureaucratic processes of taking and the bar exam. And then we have a program. In fact, I think we have a program in exactly 15 minutes on the US bar that Leslie is leading.
I probably have to leave.
Right, so she's about to take off, and Andres is about to go to. So the good news for you is that this was my last slide. So for now, this is all I have. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out. Andres, if you have a few more minutes to stick around, that would be wonderful because students may have questions for you specifically. And follow our social media channels as well. Follow social media channels of other schools. It will help you learn more about the school, might help you actually write a better personal statement. So it's a little bit of a life hack for you. And certainly, if you would like to reach out to me directly, don't hesitate to do so. Thank you, everyone, and I will stop sharing now. All right.
So first of all, thank you so much for the presentation. I guess all the information was very useful for all the participants. I saw a lot of questions, and I guess you answered the majority of them. However, I don't know if maybe you can give us like a summarize or maybe just like a piece of advice to all these participants once they start the application process with you. What would be that piece of advice?
Okay. Well, I think my biggest piece of advice to everyone would be to really spend time looking at each individual school, apply to maybe not fewer schools, but spend more time researching and looking at them. And my second piece of advice is don't rely on crowdsourcing. I see a lot of students going astray and making bad decisions or poor choices because instead of asking people at the law school or our graduates or graduates of other schools, they're going on WhatsApp groups and getting advice from random people on the internet who may or may not know anything about what they're talking about. So my third piece of advice is talk to graduates of the schools that you're interested in. They are the best people to give you honest, realistic, and I think very useful feedback, especially from your own country, right? Because they have a particular understanding of how a law school, any law school, their classes, their curriculum, their atmosphere aligns with your country, with your background, with your culture.
Yeah, and I would say like the same question to Andres. Maybe in your experience, what would be the piece of advice for all the students that are in the same process that you were like years before?
Yeah, I think my key takeaways would be start researching with time, do the whole process with time, gather all your documents, do the translations, get the recommendation letters, start writing your statement uh, with enough time. The same as with Colfuturo, you have everything you have to do it with time, with patience, because when you do anything with rush, it will not go well. And really be truthful with yourself, with your I'm speaking as a Colombian, with your budget, with your preferences, with your own interests regarding your future, and that will, at the end, that will work out, and everything will be just fine. And the decision you make will be the best one you could have made. So that's my advice: time and uh, truthfulness about yourself, and that will lead you to the best program you can choose. All right. Lady, if you want, I can
Yeah.
answer more questions in Spanish if you want. Probably
Uh,
for around 15
yeah,
minutes.
I mean, if you have time, you can go
So
ahead and
yeah,
answer.
yeah.
I saw a lot of
I
questions, so
already yeah
go
I
ahead
saw
if you
my
want.
issues, so I'm okay if anyone
Excellent.
has any more questions.
And I'm gonna hop off, but I wanted to thank you all for attending and staying on. Hopefully this was useful to you. Thank you to Col Futuro for your partnership. Thank you, Andres, for spending your time here. And I tried to answer some more questions in the chat, but do feel free to reach out. Uh, Forgive me if I don't respond right away. I'm in the middle of admissions, but I will get to you, I promise. And good luck to all of you. I'm sure you'll all find, like Andres said, a great program for you, and it will be a meaningful experience. All right. Have a good day,
Mm.
night,
Vale,
everybody. Bye-bye.
Tal
listo.
vez, Andrés, para, no nos queda pronto mucho tiempo, pero podríamos tomarnos, yo creo que 4 minuticos para responder
Perfecto,
las que nos preguntaron puntualmente para ti. Entonces, déjame y
perfecto,
reviso.
perfecto, sí.
No sé si tienes alguna en mente que
Déjame ver, es que yo
quisieras.
no sé ni cómo.
Ah, acá está una pregunta de Jonathan. Esta es si podría tener tu contacto, tal vez un correo o algún medio con que puedan contactarse contigo.
Sí, claro. Déjenme y les paso por el chat mi correo, por si tienen alguna duda. Con el mayor gusto. O si quieren, sí, si quieren buscarme en LinkedIn, también pueden hacerlo. Y, pero pues aquí está mi correo.
Bien.
Listo. Ahí les envío para, pues, si tienen
Espérame.
alguna pregunta
Y lo pongo
más
acá para todos,
específica.
everyone. Listo. Y tal vez quisiera tomar la pregunta que creo que es muy importante, que nos hizo Camilo sobre el tema del personal statement. Entonces, tal vez si nos podrías dar como tu experiencia, cómo fue ese proceso y cuáles serían los consejos para hacer un escrito exitoso, digámoslo algo así.
Entonces, el personal statement, o sea, lo que les dije, háganlo con tiempo. Escojan como una narrativa. Entonces, creo que en mi caso yo hablé de mi experiencia académica y profesional, o sea, como enfocada como a resolver problemas. En el caso de Estados Unidos, no sé para otros países, pero les encanta como cuando uno tiene las habilidades de resolución de problemas en el momento. Entonces, yo recuerdo que hablé de en la universidad cuando pues, tenía un problema digamos, un problema de investigación, entonces cómo me acerqué al problema y lo resolví. Igualmente en el trabajo, uno en el trabajo siempre tiene problemas prácticos, no solamente jurídicos, sino de personalidad o de equipo, entonces cómo uno empieza a resolver esos problemas. Y lo que les dije, hablen de la universidad, entonces algo que les llama la atención, no tiene que ser de Duke, puede ser de cualquiera, entonces me gusta, no sé, la universidad en París porque el programa tiene estas características y así. ¿Y qué quieren hacer en el futuro? Pues con el programa, o sea, ¿para qué el programa? Finalmente, yo creo que de lo más importante es para qué está uno haciendo esto. Entonces, pues contarles un poco lo que tienen en mente de, no, quiero participar en una organización internacional, quiero volver a Colombia para apoyar en el gobierno, en el Ministerio de Ambiente, lo que sea. Es simplemente como el porqué. O sea, es como tener una narrativa, no hacerlo muy largo y no enfocarse en sus prácticas profesionales, sino como en experiencias, es más como experiencia, sí, de experiencias que hayan tenido y que demuestren habilidades y personalidad. Yo creo que eso es lo que más les gusta a ellos.
Listo. Y bueno, Andrés, yo te agradezco por el tiempo que tomaste para las preguntas. Desafortunadamente ya se nos corrió un poquito más de la hora estimada. Sin embargo, para todos los participantes tenemos el correo de Andrés en caso de que quieran contactarse directamente con él. E igualmente, si no estoy mal, está el correo que nos dejaron de Duke. No sé si está, no estaba en la presentación, pero yo lo compartiré a los correos de todos los participantes para que también si tienen dudas sobre los programas de LLM u otro tipo de programas de la facultad o de la Escuela de Derecho, también puedan contactarse con ellos.
Sí,
Así que
claro.
sin más, muchas gracias a todos, de nuevo gracias Andrés y esperamos vernos en una próxima oportunidad.